would recommend identify your fear. Write it down, say it out loud. Because I think what happens is we get so much in our heads, but we don't ever verbalize it or we don't write it. And so it starts to take a life of its own.
Welcome to the What I Meant to Say podcast. I'm your host, Wendy Jones, founder of Be Better Media and a mom of 4, passionate about human connection. Throughout my journey, I have experienced many What I Meant to Say moments. But since life doesn't give us do-overs, I've created a space to reflect and tell our stories again with a little more grace for ourselves and the hope that we can help others and be better for having listened. I'm so excited. Welcome to the What I Meant to Say podcast. I'm your host, Wendy Jones, and I'm here today with Marissa Rodriguez, one of my absolute favorite yoga teachers at Soho Yoga, and there are many of them, but Marissa's an absolute gem. We met, I don't even know if you remember this, early morning when I was doing teacher training, I think, and nobody showed up for class. And you and I sat and talked.
Yes.
And so that connection started there, and it's just grown, and I'm so excited you're here today. So Thank you for taking the time to come have a What I Meant to Say conversation.
Yes, thank you for having me. It's weird, I didn't remember at the moment, but then when you said that, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And it was so much fun and so long ago.
I know, and it was at our favorite time of day, like early morning, the sun's not even up yet, and we still connect. Some of my favorite faces are the ones I see at 6 a.m. or even before, and you know, you've just been one of those, and your story I felt like was so compelling. The more I've learned about it, for so many, we have a lot of young athlete listeners or parents and people talking about just their identity through sport. Yeah. And your story lends itself to that. So I'm excited to dig into that today. And I just learned so many things from you on the mat. So thank you.
Cool. Well, it's exciting. And I love the people that come in early, you know, it's because they have so much life that they have to get done. And so I always appreciate those people that come in early because you know that they want to be there. It's like not the people that are just like coming in whenever. It's like you're coming in because this yoga practice is a part of you and it's something like you need in your daily life.
It's so important. And the days that I don't get to start it there, because there's something about the community too. Yeah. And you know, just being in that room with other people that are of like minds and kind of on the path. It's the best way to start your day. Yeah. So, So there's so many things that you have said as a teacher, but I want to just dig into a little bit of your early sports background before we get to the yoga part. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about how you grew up and how you got your start in athletics.
Yeah. So my whole family was very into sports as I grew up. So I have 2 older brothers. And 2 parents who are both very active. Like my dad played basketball, not in any like big capacity, but just always played sports. And he actually still runs marathons to this day, and he's about to be 70. So like we have a very active family. So me growing up, I started in basketball and volleyball. Those were like my 2 big sports, even though if you're looking at me, you're like, oh, you're a little on the small side, 5'2", but in basketball, I really liked being a point guard. That was really fun. Volleyball, I was actually originally a setter, but then I stopped growing. Okay. So, you know, if you're in the clubs world, you know that you still gotta have some height, but I was left-handed, so that was kind of like the cool thing as being a setter, you know, being left-handed. But then once everyone kept growing and I didn't, I moved into a libero. So I did that all through elementary, junior high, high school. And our high school team was fairly good. We were a small private school. I'm originally from Bakersfield, California, so I went to a small Catholic school. But we played a lot of really big teams, and it was fun, and it was great. But then what happened was I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis when I was 2 years old. So I don't really know a life without rheumatoid arthritis. I've always had it. So with that, in between all of those sports, it was a lot of flare-ups. It was a lot of up and downs. So then when I became a sophomore in high school, my doctor told me that he would not clear me for land sports. But he originally just said sports. But I was like, well, what kind of sports? After I got through the whole intense, like, I love sports. I do, like, that was a label, like we talked about, like being an athlete, that's what you are. And especially growing up, that's like your community. Those are your friendships. Like it's, you go to practice with them, you go to school with them, you're with them all the time.
Yeah.
So he said, you need to find a low impact sport if you want to do a sport. So that's when I found swim and water polo. Low impact, you're in the water. Like, how's that? Even though I would say water polo is a little impact, but
yeah, it's a lot tougher. When they started doing the underwater cameras at the Olympics, then people started seeing what water polo is really about. But
like they grind your toenails, they check your nails. Like these nails would not suffice. So basically, then what happened was, after sitting with it a while of like not playing volleyball, not doing basketball, not really doing any other land sport, I was like, okay, let me try this. And luckily, one of my best friends growing up, she was on the swim team and the water polo team. So we were best friends actually because our brothers played basketball together.
Yep.
Full circle. That's how we became best friends. She was on the swim team and water polo team. So she was like, just try it. Just like go for it. So again, if you look at me, I'm not the biggest person. And in swim, it's about long arms, long legs. So luckily though, I was, for a high schooler, was pretty good. Sprinter, like, had a lot of fun with it.
What were your favorite races?
So I did the butterfly, which again.
Okay, yeah. So you're a badass. Yeah.
And butterfly and freestyle. Those are my two main ones. I was horrible at breaststroke.
Another similarity between the two of us, I say. Yeah, I feel you.
Well, especially with my arthritis. So my arthritis was mainly in my knee, and my left knee and my ankles. So you have to do breaststroke very perfectly with your legs. Mine was very like, just like one leg after the other.
Not efficient.
Would get disqualified sometimes. And then my swim coach was like, okay, let's focus on freestyle and butterfly. So those are my strokes. And then in water polo, I was a wing. So wasn't the best at water polo, but I had a lot of stamina because I was a swimmer. Yeah. So I was able to do fast breaks. I was able to like sprint and get there before a lot of other teams would. So that was like really the only great thing that I have. I was like, fast break, basketball. I know that. Like I know what a fast break is.
Yeah.
So that was really fun. And our water polo team was pretty good, but it's really funny because I only ended up playing water polo my senior year because I was too nervous. Like junior year, I was like, it's a little intense. So I ended up doing it my senior year. And what was funny was I ended up getting like number 42 out of 50, like top 50 girls water polo in California. The only reason why, if I'm being honest, was we played against the number one team in the state, which is basically the number one team in the country because California and like a few other states are the only ones that do water polo. We were playing the number one team in the state, and everyone was literally fouled out. So then like I went in and we were getting crushed by this team. I ended up making a shot like last second, and because I made a shot against this team that was like so great, I ended up getting like top 40 something out of like 50, and I was like, great, I'll take it.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so it was fun and I really liked it. And honestly, swim gave me this, like I never would have tried swimming if it wasn't for losing volleyball and basketball. So it gave me this whole different sense of like, you can pivot.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily like, yes, it might not be what you thought growing up, but like it allowed you to pivot. And then also with that, I got my first job. I became a lifeguard, and like then I taught swim, and like that taught me work ethic. And so it led me down this path of like something that I probably wouldn't have done if I stayed in the sports that I was in. So kind of making it, okay, this part of my life might be over, and that might be sad, especially when you're in high school. That's your whole life.
Yeah.
So having the ability to change was really fun. Like looking back, I was really excited about it.
What do you think it was about your personality that helped you see those things at such a young age?
I mean, my family were all about work ethic, almost to a fault, if I'm being honest. As I mentioned earlier, my parents are migrant farm workers, and then they became lawyers, and so they always instilled in us to like be active, do things, like try things, keep going. So I think the biggest thing for me was I knew that I wasn't ready to like stop being active. I didn't want to just like stop playing sports altogether. So your thought is like, okay, these are things you can't do, but what can you do? And I think that was a lot for my parents, was like they never let doors that slammed in front of them be the only door. They created a new one for themselves. And so that's one of the things that they taught me. And same with my brothers, like they always had to pivot as well, whether it was sports, whether it was school, whether it was like clubs that you're a part of. So I think I just had really good examples growing up of like, okay, this opportunity may not be the thing that's working for you, but what can? And like focusing on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I love that. I heard you say like you didn't play water polo till your senior year.
Yeah.
And you were scared your junior year. So what are some of the things, like if you were talking to a younger athlete, like working through things that you're scared of? Because I see that a lot in gyms these days, like that fear of messing up or failure. Like,
it's funny that you say that, because it also just reminded me of volleyball. I was in a tryout for a club team, and there was I was only 14, and it was an 18-year-old, and she was 6-something. I was going out as libero, slammed a ball right in my face. Like, one of those where they just...
Oh, yeah.
And for a good few weeks, even months maybe, I got really all of a sudden like you get this freeze mentality. And you're like, I know how to bump. Like, I know how to do a dig.
Yeah.
But you just get so into your head. So one of the things that like I would recommend, identify your fear. Write it down. Say it out loud. Because I think what happens is we get so much in our heads, but we don't ever verbalize it, or we don't write it. And so it starts to take a life of its own. It starts to turn into one fear into multiple fears. And I think it's good to be able to talk it out and verbalize why you're scared, and then notice if that's really a fear, or if it's maybe ego, maybe expectations, maybe pressures, rather than an actual literal fear.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of where identifying it and labeling as a fear, then changing that label of like, oh, that's an expectation I put on myself.
Yeah.
But like, if I happen to get hit in the face with a ball again, like, I'm gonna be okay.
Yeah.
Like, I'm gonna shake it off.
Right.
So I think a lot of it is a mental game, but not letting it manifest. Instead, writing it down and figuring out the ways to change what that actually is, and how to go about it and how to go around it.
Yeah. I think we so often we don't realize until we shine a light on it, and it feels so scary.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, whether it's in business or a relationship or in sports, but that thing that we don't want to say, and until we say it and write it down, or talk to somebody about it, and all of a sudden it's like, wow, it's so much smaller.
Yeah.
But when it's in the dark, man, it's so scary.
Right. And just like a small example into yoga really quick is tree pose. I always talk about this in tree pose. So for those of you that don't know tree pose, it's the very iconic Instagram yoga pose. Yeah. You have your foot and your inner thigh and your arms reach up. Whenever you want someone to know you do yoga on Instagram, that's the pose you do.
Yes.
So in my classes, I realized that whenever we do single leg balance things, people get really in their head, like, I'm gonna fall out, and then it's gonna be embarrassing, and like all these things are gonna happen. So what do? I address it right away. As soon as the class goes into tree pose, I say, move around your arms, make yourself fall out, because the worst thing that happens, your foot touches the ground. You don't get graded. Yeah. You don't it's okay if your balance is off today. But what I've noticed is people have this ego or this fear, what they call it in quotes, but really it's just all of this manifesting in them when it if they just think about it, if they just let it go, change it from a fear to this unrealistic expectation.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, I don't need to put that on myself. I don't need to put that pressure on myself. Then they're like, going crazy in tree pose.
Yeah.
So that's just a small example. But like you said, in relationships, in your job, like really identifying what that's really coming from.
Yep.
Helps it so much easier to overcome.
Well, and what I love about yoga is that it, in this performance-based world, and you see all of the personalities that come through Soho, right? And I know there are yoga studios all over the country that are littered with yogis like us that are trying so hard to banish our perfectionism that we will get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and we're always towing that line between I see that in me, but there's something about getting to the mat that will take you out of that performance-based mindset.
Yeah.
And then you realize when you get out of that flow is there. Mm-hmm. And then you're actually, your performance is actually better.
Right?
Right? But when you're so afraid to mess up, and I see that, time and time again with athletes.
Especially with athletes.
Yeah.
And also, I know we'll probably talk about a little more. So I was in athletic training in college.
Yes.
So I worked for my college football team. So I went to the University of Arizona and I worked as an athletic training assistant for the football team. And there, college football, talk about pressure.
Yeah.
Talk about, it's a billion-dollar industry that these 18-year-old to 20-something-year-old are dealing with. The amount of pressure is insane.
Yep. And identity.
Yes.
And injury.
Injury, all of a sudden injury happens and they're terrified that they're going to lose their identity.
Yeah.
And so I think being around that and seeing the pressures of these athletes and what they go through, for the majority of them, once they get out of college, they're not going to be an athlete anymore, at least to the capacity that they have been.
Yeah.
So I think really labeling, okay, what's a realistic expectation? But then what is a pressure that I'm putting on myself that is not a realistic expectation? And really separating the two.
Yeah.
Because it's important to have goals. It's important to have drive. It's important to have work ethic. It's important to want to be better. But in a realistic sense, and how your body, your mind, your heart can really do it, versus creating an unrealistic expectation that's just gonna throw you off your game more.
Yeah. Take you out of the present, force you into burnout.
Yes.
Right? And then all of a sudden the joy that you once found in whatever you were doing is gone.
Yep, 100%.
Right? And I always see it, I call it the realization that I'm never gonna win Wimbledon phenomenon. I remember having it when I was 23, but I distinctly remember driving down the road and going, okay, I'm never going to win Wimbledon. And I wasn't even a tennis player. It was just this.
I was going to say,
what?
Yeah,
no, but it's that moment that you're but I think it was the first time I realized, and I don't know why at that point it did happen, but it's something where you realize there's always someone that's better than you.
Yeah.
So what do you want to do?
Yeah.
Right? Because there's a path. When you tap into your passion and you have those things that you just, the work ethic and the drive and all of those things. But you're always going to hit that point, especially in sports or anywhere else, that you realize someone's better than you. Mm-hmm. And so what can you control, right?
Yeah. Well, and what I love that you said that, because what I love is, you're right, there is always someone better than you. So why not learn from them?
Oh. God, amen.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Why, instead of picking yourself apart because you're not as good as them, use them as a resource.
Yeah.
We are in the land of resources. We're on a podcast. There's the internet. There's social media. There's all of these things that we now have at the tips of our fingers that we didn't have 10, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So why not change that into a resource? I think we've been so into this mentality where we have to pin up against each other, when it's now no, let's help each other. Let's use each other.
Yeah. That's another thing that came from yoga practice,
yeah,
right? It's that abundance mindset that we're not competing against each other.
Yeah.
But yeah, and we all have given strengths, and we get to play from our strengths and let other people bring their strengths to the party and look at the rising tide that floats all boats.
Exactly. And it's funny that you say that too, just because I remember when I first started being a yoga teacher, and to let everyone know that like yoga teachers are also humans, I would get really self-conscious about my numbers and when I say my numbers of how many people came to my class, I would get really nervous about it because someone else would have more people in their class, or like someone seemed more popular, or someone would be upset that I was teaching versus another teacher. Those are real things that have happened to me, and instead of like, for a long time I did let it get the best of me. There was like, oh, like I'm not good enough, I'm not a good teacher, things like that. Like there's a lot of that doubt.
Yeah.
But then as I started getting better and things, started to morph, and, I feel very confident as a teacher, one thing that I've really pledged to myself is like, you have to share that. Like when someone comes in, it's not about me being a more popular teacher or a better teacher or whatever. It's about, okay, I see this person is trying to be a part of this community. So how can I better help them to become a teacher that feels more evolved and feels more comfortable in this space? Because I used to be new to this space and I know how that felt. And same thing when I go to another studio, like if I'm teaching somewhere else in whatever capacity, I hope that a person that has been there for a while does the same for me. Because even in yoga, that can happen. Like, because for me, that is my career. And so like, you want to be up there, but also like noticing, hey, what can I get from this teacher? And how can I help this other teacher? And how can we all help each other make this community thrive versus like comparing yourself to one another?
Yeah, there's so much in what you just said that I could grab onto. I'm trying to pick my point first. One thought I'm having is that message to the next generation in this world of social media and, talking to high schoolers and even in college, that idea that our ego is so involved in wanting to belong. And when you get to a place where you've kind of learned a little bit more about your relationship with your ego, and yoga really helps with that. Like how can we, and I know you teach kids too, so it's like my mind is racing, but like how do we take that, what we learn ourselves, and bring that out to the next generation that's dealing with so many things? So tell me some of the things you're working on with the younger generation.
So there's a few things. So I do kids yoga through Breathe and Learn. They're not a brick and mortar. They kind of do different events over in the South Bay. And so we do journaling along with the yoga. So it's not just traditional yoga, because a lot of you parents know out there, like having your kid do just one activity for 1 hour is very hard.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is doing a lot of different activities. And then also with that, we do like collaboration as an activity, teamwork as an activity, communication as an activity, compassion. So it's really fun because you get to not only teach them, yes, asana yoga, like proper movement, but you get to teach them, oh, like this is your neighbor, this is your classmate. Like how can you build a relationship with them, a healthy relationship with them, and use that versus, everyone going against each other. So with kids yoga, that's what I really like to do. More with junior high school, I focus on the physical body quite a bit, just because that's a big growing period for them physically. So there is a little more physical focus on that, like the importance of stretching, which we all know now as adults.
Yes. Just getting my 6'6" son to stretch his hamstrings yesterday.
Oh, great. I'm so happy we're starting somewhere.
Oh my heavens. No, but we've been working on that for years, and they're still real tight.
Right?
So, yeah, I know.
And so focusing on the physical body, because also I think it's not just, about them being physically fit, but also they're in a state of transition. Yeah. And again, as we talked about this world we're in, there's so many outside voices of telling kids what they should look like, what they should feel like, how cool they should be, and how they should be cool, and all that stuff. So really giving them the tools to like have mind-body connection is so important. Because I remember me as a teenager, like, you know, you're like trying all these different things, like makeup and clothes, and you know, it's fun to express yourself, don't get me wrong, but also like kind of throwing out a lot of the gunk and keeping what feels authentic to you. So that's kind of what the focus is with like junior high and high schools, is physical body, but also not just stretching and stuff, which is great, but also being comfortable in your skin when we're in a world that's telling us that we should look like X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. What are some of the ways you think we can model that, you know, that trying things out and letting it be an evolution of learning rather than like, oh, I messed that up? And
I think it's a conversation. If it's one thing, and if my parents listen to this, I think they can agree. With their generation, it was kind of about just doing and keeping going, and there wasn't a whole lot of conversation behind things. And so now, I think, not that I am a parent, which I hope to be someday, not in a few years, I'll be excited for it. But I think one of the ways is having a real conversation with them about, this is something I'm trying out. And they're like, cool, I like it. Cool, I don't. I think showing our kids and our younger generation that we're human too is really important. And I would assume, you can correct me by your experience, we want to kind of seem like we have it all together, at least in the beginning. When you first have little ones, you're like, I got this together, I got everything. But I think they'll appreciate that you show your humanity. You know, like my parents split up when I was 5. So I think without them knowing, they both showed their humanity more, even when they thought that they weren't. But I appreciated that, because now as an adult, I see like, oh, they have emotions too. They were struggling too. They had things they were going through, while also being great lawyers, great parents, like providing for us. But they were also trying to figure out a lot of what to go through. So I think reminding your children and your younger generation, if you work with kids and not have your own children, that you are a human, that you are not perfect. Reminding them that, and even getting their opinion on things, I think is a great idea.
Big believer. Generational learning works both ways.
Yes.
I mean, I love to think that I've taught my kids a lot of things, or other athletes, but like they teach me as much as I teach them, for sure. So maybe more.
I think hearing them, like listening to them, and even in the yoga world, like I think it's really fun when kids like teach me a new pose that they just like made up out of their imagination. I'm like, wow, I would have never thought of that. So it's like physical and mentally, like they have these perspectives that we have kind of grown out of at this time. So let's like go back and use it. You know?
Because that's, I mean, play is such a universal language, right? I mean, my youngest, he had a speech delay, and we traveled to, he and I went to Italy, and I remember getting to this tennis club, and when we were here, he would always have such a hard time, you know, communicating with other kids and really getting into the play setting. We got to this place where nobody spoke his language, and to just watch them run and jump and dive in the pool and jump off the high dive, and I remember that feeling of like, why can't it feel like that at home? Because so often, like, the way we're just, the words are getting in the way. But then, like, our bodies and the way we play and express ourselves can completely be just a universal language.
And it is, you're right. And that's what I love, is like, that's what these kids classes always remind me of, is just, while we come in and unroll our mat and we came in at our own time, your energy is affecting the person that's next to you. And behind you, and in front of you, and to the other side. And as adults, I think we tend to think, oh no, we're doing our own thing. But for however long that yoga class is, you all decided in whatever way to be here together. So use that play.
Yeah.
You know, it's fun. Kids remind you of exactly that, that universal language that we all just need to move and we all need to play. And then from that grows ideas for bigger projects.
Seriously, I every day I'm like, I walk out of that room and I'm like, I need to write a few of these thoughts down
You
on my
always
phone.
say that.
I'm telling you, if I could invent the recorder that either takes your thoughts from swimming laps or being on a yoga mat, like that is my, those brainwaves are powerful.
Well, it's funny that you say that. So one of my students, she asked me, she goes, can you just write down all the things you say at the end of class and then just put it in a book? And I was like, if I could remember,
isn't that the
what
truth?
I say.
I'm again, it's nice to know that other people have the same.
Oh my gosh, I say it to people.
Yeah.
And I still can't remember what I said. I'm like, I said something about compassion, but like I said something really good, but I just can't remember.
Yeah.
It.
Well, I have one thought, and the day that I asked you to do this, I remember that one of the things you said was that the world encourages us, or the world will tell you not to shine.
Yeah.
Like the message that we get is to be smaller, to play it small, to be safe, to tuck ourselves in.
I know exactly that.
And that message resonates so big time with me because I never realized generationally how that was kind of a message and a theme in my family, not to anyone's fault.
No.
It just was. And I heard it on another podcast. I heard a guy talking about that. Look back at the generational messages that you've received. And then I realized how much that played into my story. So when you hit on that, beyond your health and athletic story, like tell me a little bit about your perspective on that.
I could talk for hours on this one. So I am Mexican American. My parents are both full Mexican, so I'm full Mexican. I think a lot of it is, like you said, generational. So especially my specific story, my parents were taught to play by the rules, and then the rules will get you to success. And to be fair, that's really how it did work for them. Like they went to high school, they went to college, they went to law school. They both have their own firms. Like they did it. But what's happened is that through that time between them being in school and my siblings and I being in school, it's not necessarily the same way. I know people that have like master's degrees, and then they are trying to still get a job that can just like get them a regular pay. Even that.
Yeah.
So my take on it is I was taught to play by the rules. I was taught to not make a fuss. I was taught to listen to the authority figure and not question them. And for some instances, I think that works. Sure. But I would have not been a yoga teacher if that was what I followed. And even to this day, I actually still get self-conscious calling myself a yoga teacher, not because I'm not proud of it, but because I think people think it's not like a real job. And I'm like, I teach 30 classes a week, along with leading like 2 teacher trainings right now, doing my own teacher training. And so it's just, you know.
Not to mention you're changing a lot of lives along the way.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, you really are.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So I think my thought is learn the rules so you can appropriately break them. Learn those rules so you can appropriately break them. I say it a lot in my classes. And so that's what I mean. Like, yeah, maybe learn to play by the rules. Learn what it feels like to be small. But then push the system. Question it. Why do they want you to be small? And if that doesn't resonate with you, then challenge it. And that's kind of my big thing is like, I've been taught, and I am physically a small person, so I've been taught that my voice doesn't matter. Well, in yoga, you're talking all the time as the teacher. So your voice really does matter. So for people that feel like they have to follow a blueprint, that they have to do what generations before them has done, exactly the same way? Really like lay it out. Lay out what your ideas are, what your intuitive body has been telling you to go to, and then what that blueprint looks like. Maybe feel like, okay, these rules make sense. These rules don't make sense. How can I appropriately break them to help benefit me?
I hope you're enjoying this conversation on What I Meant to Say, produced by my company, Be Better Media. To see the world of why we are striving to share inspired edutainment, I invite you to please check out our website, bebettermedia.tv. Here you will find all kinds of great stuff, from upcoming new productions to lifestyle products and services I personally use and endorse, to links to great books and other podcasts I love and recommend. Please check us out at bebettermedia.tv. That's bebettermedia.tv.
And use that. That's so you can grow bigger, so you can make a voice.
Yeah.
So I really like that you remembered that, because that's one that like I'm constantly going back to, because people will tell you like, don't make a fuss. And I'm not a what's the word? I'm not a, I don't like getting into arguments. Why can't I think of the word?
Confrontational.
Confrontational.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm not a confrontational person. So it's really hard for me to
It's a big one.
Yeah.
It is a big one to learn the moments when it's is something to confront, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's really hard. And so,
and yet another thing yoga will help you with.
Yep.
Right?
I know.
Respond,
it
not
will,
react.
to listen, yeah.
To sit and listen, let it sit.
Yeah.
And then if it's still sitting,
there's
it
a
tells
reason
you
why.
to speak. Yeah.
And that's very much the same as like looking at the blueprint and looking at what you want.
Yeah.
Like sit with it. Sit with it. How does it help?
Yeah.
How does it not? What works for you to take with you? Because like I said, I think that my parents they taught me a lot of great lessons. But then they also taught me things of like, that's how I'm not going to live my life.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of interweaving, which I think what will happen when I have kids is like, they're going to teach me things of like, okay, Mom, you did it this way, but I'm going to take a few pieces from that and then also add in my own.
Yeah.
And that's what evolving is. That's what we're supposed to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I always say like, well, actually, have you read Matthew McConaughey's book?
No, but I want to.
Okay, it's a great
I've
and
listened
easy
to so many
read.
of his podcast interviews,
It's
but
a
I
great
haven't
voice,
read the book.
by the way, right?
Such a good voice. I could listen to him all day.
Yeah, exactly. But there's a quote in his book, and it's one of my favorites. It's conservative early, liberal late. And it's like, it sums it up so well, because I hear with what you're saying, those foundational values that teach you how to get up and put one foot in front of the other and not say like, not let your mood, this is what we're going to do. This is who we are. This is how we go about things. And then as you build, you have that foundation, which allows you to start questioning.
Exactly.
And everybody's questions are different.
Yep.
And everyone's messenger is different, and it's okay.
Yeah.
Versus thinking like there's one way to do things and then feeling all of this shame and guilt when you kind of want to veer off your path and you feel like you're offending someone, but you're not.
No. You're just like living your life, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that. And that's something that I've really been okay with more and more the last few years. I remember the first time I told my parents, it was a really big deal when I told them I was going to get into yoga. Mm-hmm. So I was already at Soho as a student, already practicing. And I was in a 7-day-a-week job as a behavior therapist. And it was so stressful. You're like getting bit, you're getting hit, you're getting scratched, you're in people's homes, and it's a lot. And I do still work into that industry just a little bit, but it was a ton. And while I loved a good part of it, I knew it was not my path. And I had my parents, I asked them to set up a meeting when I was in Bakersfield at home. We met at my mom's office. My dad came, my mom came. We haven't had like a talk, the three of us, in decades at that point.
Wow.
because like I said, they split up when I was 5, so everything was either like whole as a family or just with one of them at a time. It was never just us 3.
Mm-hmm.
So I sat them down and I told them, and this was before I even did teacher training, I was just like, this yoga thing is really calling to me. So I'm going to go part-time. Because again, like you said, I was like, I had the values of like, you can't just like go off and play. Like you have to, you know, work and do the things. So I said, I'm going to move to part-time in my job and I'm going to focus on yoga. And then 2 months later, I signed up for teacher training. And again, I wasn't planning on being a teacher. I was just like, I need to like learn more about this, about the lifestyle, not just the mat. That's great. And I love it. I love anatomy. I can talk about that for days. But what's more with that? And then teaching just kept happening and kept growing. And then eventually I really made that the forefront. But it was a terrifying moment because I didn't want them to think I was ungrateful for all the things that they've given me or the blueprint that they showed me and that they trusted and that got them to their success.
Yeah.
And I was very lucky that they were very supportive. I was terrified that they weren't going to be, but they were very supportive and were like, hey, you do things 100%. So if you're going to go for yoga, we think you're going to go for it. So I got very lucky in that sense. But it was definitely a terrifying moment because I was literally telling them, I'm stepping off the blueprint and I'm terrified. But something in my body is telling me that I have to do this. And
you have the foundation to trust those feelings.
Yeah.
And that's huge. And I think that's one of the best things as parents we can do for our kids.
Yeah.
You know, I have a similar situation. My third born quit playing volleyball and said, Mom, I want to do theater. And she's been a theater kid since post-COVID. And I mean, she was doing family theater in Hermosa since she was tiny. But, you know, and she was really scared because, you know, her older two siblings are volleyball players. And I looked at her and I remember saying, Kate, if you were telling me that I couldn't play volleyball anymore, then we'd have something to talk about. But, you know, it's that bravery that it takes to like to step out and follow your dream. And now she's going to go to college in as a film major like next year. You know what I mean?
Gosh,
like it all plays out.
It evolves and it grows.
If you're having those conversations and like for you to be able, even though it's uncomfortable, and those conversations are uncomfortable, but that's the thing. It's like somewhere in there was something where you knew to trust yourself enough and your parents had built that foundation in you to be able to, even though it's uncomfortable, to have the conversation.
To express it.
It's huge.
Yeah.
It's so huge. And I think so many times people are like so locked in on the perfect family and the perfect Christmas card, the way I put it. You know, it's like, dude, life's not like that.
It's funny you say that. Everyone kept asking my fiance and I where our Christmas card was. And we were like, yeah, we just don't do them. At least right now in our lives. Like maybe later, but like.
Trust your gut on that. I did a New Year's card this year for the first time because I was feeling super stressed. And I'm like, I'm letting it go.
You're like, you do it later.
I do it later. And then it worked, you know? And I loved then getting those text messages in January when people were like, oh my gosh, I got your card. And my thought is, I love receiving other people's cards. So I'm like, oh, don't forget about me, because I love seeing families grow up. And, you know, so I'm very thankful for the ones I get. But it's not worth the extra stress.
Yeah, and we were just like this year, like maybe later we'll do it.
Yeah.
But just, you know, probably when we get married next year, we'll want to send that photo up. And we're like, we're good right now.
No, it's all good, you know, and trust your gut. Trust your gut. So I was thinking it would be fun because I have a couple of, I mean, there's so many things that occur to me on my mat, like I was saying, but I have a couple different ideas that are huge, and I'd love to. Well, they're huge to me, but I would love to get your yoga teacher perspective on a few of my thoughts. So one of the things I've learned on the mat is that life is a dance between stability and mobility.
Oh my God, yes.
And nothing, I mean, you know me, I've got a wonky ankle. I went through an ankle reconstruction last year. Still coming back, starting to feel better, but it's taken a long time. My 1 year will be Valentine's Day. So,
oh my gosh, it's coming up.
So it's coming up. But that concept of life being a dance between stability and mobility, does that make sense to you?
Oh, yeah. So when you said that, my first thought was like the yin and yang symbol.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go to our studio or if you've been to Soho Yoga, it's a lot of yang energy for the most part. We have some yin styles, but the majority of them are yang, which is a very nice depiction of our neighborhood and of like, you know, our community. But what I love is those moments where people come into like a yin class or a yin and yang or a flow roll and release or whatever kind of lower pace.
That's the one that got me hooked.
Yeah. And this connection where they're like, oh, I have to slow down. I have to, in order for me to expand, to move, to have range of motion, I can't have all this junk sitting on me and being so tight where I can't move. With stability, you can have stability and still have this range of motion. The whole point of us having stability and security is so that when we decide to go off, we decide to change things, we decide to expand, we know that it's coming from a space of good foundation like we talked about. So I love that you say that, because a lot of people just want the stability and they're spending so much time wanting to create that stability that then they don't become flexible. And that's more in like a figurative sense, if I'm being honest.
Right.
You know?
But isn't it amazing? It's all connected,
Oh,
right?
all connected.
Like,
because your body stores all of that.
yeah.
It does.
Oh my, teacher training taught me that. I'm like, what in the world?
What's in my hips?
What's in my hips and why can't I stop crying? What just happened? Like, it's unreal.
It is.
And this is what I want athletes to know, is that like there's nobody better, and not that everybody shouldn't be doing yoga, but like we're so body based.
Yes.
So when you get in there and you realize the stories that are in your body and the way that you're living your life and how tied up it is in your system, in your physical body, it'll blow your mind.
It is. And
like,
it's funny because athletes don't realize until after, for the most part.
Yeah.
And we were just talking about it. I had a Lakers player in my class a few weeks ago, and first time ever doing yoga, and he goes after class, that was the hardest sport I've ever played in my life. And I love that he called it a sport, first off, but also it wasn't necessarily because we were doing, like, it was intense. It's hot, don't get me wrong, like you're sweating, you're dripping, you're like, I haven't felt this muscle in a few decades or ever. But a lot of it for him was like the stretching, the mobility. I haven't done that in so long. Even though they have all these resources, them actually doing it, them sitting with their body, them taking the time, moving my body this way, that way, creating mind-body connection. And don't get me wrong, I love all the extra things. Like, I'm obsessed with the Normatec. I'm obsessed with like all of these like gadgets and gizmos. Love them. But there is something about you sitting with your body and then it relating back to something that's going on in your life.
Yeah. It's huge and it's empowering.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really big.
So I love that one. Yeah. And I think more people should really focus, especially athletes. You're spending all this investment in your body. So connect to it. Don't try and just numb the symptoms. Some symptoms are good.
Yeah.
And I think we've been taught that any symptom is bad. And that's not true.
It's information.
Yes. You need to have that. So you can't just cut it all off. Don't get me wrong. If you feel poorly, you want to subside that. But also you don't want to cut off the connection where you don't notice when you're great versus when you're bad. Yeah. That's a scary place to be in. And for athletes especially, you don't want to be in that.
And grind culture will do that too.
Yes. Oh, 100%.
Yeah. Like I can run through walls.
Just live in tightness.
Yeah.
Just live in it.
And you just get used to tuning it all out, and you're just going to keep going until you... and I've had friends that it's actually happened. Yeah. I mean, it's...
until a doctor tells you you can't.
Right.
A doctor tells you you can't.
Exactly.
Like, it happens.
Yeah. So. And that's what it was leading me back to, is just a little bit more conversation on your journey with, not ever knowing I mean, if you've had rheumatoid arthritis your entire life, you've always had pain.
Yeah. So like I said, I was diagnosed at 2. It started originally in my left knee. My mom saw my knee like blown up, and at 2 she was like, what is happening? So they originally thought it was a bacteria infection, and then when they went in, they were like, never mind, it's juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, which is called something else now. It starts with an I can't really remember, but now it's rheumatoid because I'm not a juvenile, at least I think I'm not anymore.
Depends on the day, right?
But yeah, it's been a really interesting journey because I had to be on medication for a really long time. I had to be on what's called methotrexate, which for some of you that don't know, it's actually a low form of chemo. So I was taking chemo for over 20 years of my life, and I didn't even know that I was taking chemo. Like, I just knew it as methotrexate. I didn't, when you're a kid, you don't look into this stuff.
Right.
And also, to be fair to my parents, like, they didn't grow up with healthcare. They didn't have that. And so looking back and now talking to my mom especially, she's like, I wish I like looked into it more. But also in 1993,
it wasn't easy.
There wasn't an internet.
Yeah, it wasn't easy to look into things.
No, it wasn't.
And you probably, wanting your child to be out of pain is
100%.
Like, there's nothing more motivating than that.
Exactly. Yeah. And my mom said and it was like, I've probably had 9 cortisone shots at this point in my knees. I've been in and out of remission. So that's why I'm really passionate about the symptom thing, is because I grew up thinking all sensation is bad. That's pretty much like what I've been told, is like any symptom is a bad thing. It needs to get figured out. We need to like numb it. We need to like let it go.
Yeah.
So then when I got older, even after college, my knee got really bad, and so I was on methotrexate as well as Enbrel. So it's an injection that you do weekly into your thigh or your side, wherever I would do my thigh. And my arthritis was just getting so bad. Like, my knee literally locked up into a stiff position for over 2 months because I couldn't get an appointment with my rheumatologist so he could unlock it. It was a whole thing. It was a whole mess. But what I learned after that was, I was like, okay, how can I take control? How can I figure this out? Still at this point, I was still about the numbing sensation. I wasn't even at the point of like, oh, some sensation is good. I wasn't even at that mind-body connection point yet. Then I started reading about anti-inflammatory diets. I met with the nutritionist, and she also told me, she goes, you hear all these things of anti-inflammatory, but to be honest, every person's different. So I'm not going to share my diet just because my diet is specific for me. And I don't want anyone to think, oh, this is going to work for me. So what I recommend is you do what I did, is I took out different food groups and reintroduced them and see how they played into my body. So I've ended up learning that one main food group really affects my body personally. And again, I don't share it just because I don't want people to think like, oh, then this is what's going to cure me.
Right.
So I recommend you do your research, like you figure out what you can take out and then what comes back in, what will help and what will not help. So for me, I've learned a main food group really triggers it. Ever since I figured that out, I got off my medication in 6 months. I have not been back on it in the last 5 years.
That's insane.
Yeah.
And yet so believable, because the agency you took over your own problem.
Yeah.
And so much what we learn, in going back to who do you trust, and knowing when to ask questions, and knowing, obviously we've all gone to doctors and just been like, okay, tell me what to do and I'll do it.
Yeah.
But we are definitely in an age of learning to advocate for ourselves.
Yeah, 100%.
And ask the right questions.
Yeah. So,
and the power that gives you, it gives me the chills.
Yeah, and it's
But
great.
it
And
makes me
also,
so happy.
with yoga, with all the other things.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just that, but like that was the main thing.
That's the thing people don't realize nowadays, is that, and there's never been a silver bullet.
No.
And yet everybody wants one.
Yep.
And I don't care what it's for, to get us out of pain, in any any place, but there's
situation.
no silver bullet.
No.
So it's nutrition, it's
Nutrition,
sleep,
yeah,
movement,
sleep,
relationships.
I am a big like advocate for holistic health.
Yeah.
I do think Western medicine is good. Also, let me say that. I think that there's a time and place for it for sure. But being a public health major, we talk a lot about proactive versus reactive. And so in public health, that's one of the biggest things I learned is don't wait until you're broken. Constantly try and nourish and help yourself. So I consistently see an acupuncturist, I have a massage therapist, I have a chiropractor. My chiropractor is very holistic, and so we do essential oils, we do biometric work, like along with my own movement practice, my own diet, like, so it's a big range of things. And it's also knowing that, and also you knowing this and your listeners, it's going to evolve.
Exactly.
It is. So,
and you don't have to tackle it all at once, because you just listed off, and I do all those things too. Yeah. And sometimes I pull away.
Years to get there.
So just little bits at a time. And that's where my Be Better philosophy comes in, is just like, what one little thing can you do? Yeah. Don't get overwhelmed by the process. Yeah. And then you'll just, it sinks in, and then it's not hard anymore. Exactly. Yeah. It's about what can you do to be 1% better a day? That's the, like, James Clear. Yeah, I love that book. Atomic Habits. Atomic Habits. Thank you, Dad. Yeah, Dad gave me that book. I didn't read it for he gave it to me like 4 years ago. Yeah. I didn't read it till last year, so thanks. Lauren just read it. She, my 22-year-old. She was like, have you heard of this? I'm like, oh yeah, best book. You're like, been there. Yeah, it's so good. But yes. So I think, there are a lot of things. So do the small things, figure out small ways that you can help yourself, because to be honest, and also just to like kind of put this out there, because I think a lot of people say like, oh, like maybe it's like fancy nutrition or whatever. My 4 injections, so once a week for a month, my 4 injections was a $500 copay versus me spending a little more money on my food a month, which was not $500 a month of my groceries. So also just like putting a financial perspective on that. And we're also in a world where we have a lot of free resources, which I think is great. So if you're like, I can't afford a yoga studio, I can't afford these things, YouTube, great thing. Like, amen. Like if you can't afford seeing a therapist, one of the things like, I just found Movement Genius. It's like this wonderful program that has all of these exercises that you can do to help with like your anxiety and things like that. So I totally understand people feeling like they might not have the means, and I fully want to say that I see that for people. And encourage you that there's all these free resources to try and tap into and to really like focus on if this is your priority, to like, whether it's health, whether it's career, again, use your resources, because there's someone out there that's better at you in whatever it is that you're looking at. Yeah. So use it, because there's a lot of free resources out there. Yeah, and it's still in the end, it always comes down to that intrinsic motivation, right? It's like, how much do you want to make a change? Yeah. How much do you want to feel better? Yeah. And nobody can do it for you. No. That's really hard. It's not a quick fix. Yeah. It's not. Yeah. And then there are going to be times where you go down and then you go up, and that's where, the grace comes in, man. And it has to come in, because the days can be long. Yeah. Yeah. So, sorry, that was even the first thing you said. No, I know, right? I could go one more. Okay. What my yoga mat teaches me is where I end and where other people begin. That's a good one. Because I so believe in interconnection and human connection, but I want the world to get away from codependence, and understanding, how we can everyone can be strong and walk alongside each other. Yeah. And there's something about just being on that mat and having those people right next to me, and then knowing, though, that I am my own strong vessel. Yeah. And that they're empowering you, but they're not necessarily giving you your power. You have that, but they can empower you at the same time.
I love that you say that, because one of the things that I struggle with as a yoga teacher is putting yoga teachers or other types of teachers or mentors or whatever on a pedestal. I kind of talked about earlier, like with parents even, reminding your kids of your humanity, reminding them that you are not a superhero. Yes, you work hard and you do all the things and you're trying your damn best, but you're human too, and that's beautiful. It's not a bad thing. And so I, as a yoga teacher, I don't want to be put on a pedestal. I want to be right next to my students. I want them to know that I'm struggling along with them, and I'm also killing it in the game along with them. Both can be true. Yeah. And so I like that you say that, because it's not just from student to student. I hope it's from like student to teacher in any capacity that is that whether you have a mentor, whether you have a boss, an authority figure, that they, yes, are there to help you, but they're also like, they're going through their things too, and you can help them, and then we can all be next to each other versus like feeling like it's all different levels all the time, you know? Yeah. There's always something we can learn from each other.
Amen. That is so true. And that's, I love it. And that studio just does, it brings all kinds of people that are on a path.
Yeah.
And
it's fun to learn each other's paths.
Yeah.
And to kind of be like, oh wow, that's something I never thought of. Yeah. And like, I'm glad there's someone there on that path doing that thing and still feel great about your path at the same time.
Exactly.
Not feeling like, oh, do I have to do that path? It's like, no. Like, you enjoy their path. You're happy for them in their path. Yeah. And you also feel good in your path as well at the same time.
Yep. Figure out what works for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah. So, one of the questions I ask everybody that comes on What I Meant to Say, and I didn't preface you for this. I don't know if you've listened to other, but I think I know. We've already,
Okay, sorry.
Well, we've covered a lot, and you've already said a lot. I'm like, it could be that answer. But what advice would you give to your younger self?
Ooh. I think it would change over time, but the one that I'm actually sitting with right now is, it's okay to be sensitive. When I was a kid, I was told a lot that I was too sensitive, a lot. And I'm learning about astrology, but I'm a Cancer for those people that know astrology. So that is a very sensitive sign.
Yes.
But I've been told that a lot, like growing up in different facets, that I'm too sensitive. And I used to really think that it was a bad thing. And honestly, I love it, because like even this morning, right before this, I led an anxiety, like how to relieve anxiety workshop for a bunch of social workers. And that felt amazing. And a few weeks ago, I led a grief class for a student for her husband that passed. And I'm connecting with all these people, and I believe that that's because I have this sensitivity that allows people to chat with me and tell me what they're going through. So as a kid, I used to think that was a bad thing, that I needed to hold everything in. Yeah. And like push everything down.
Oh, you keep giving me the chills.
Yeah. And so now, like, I've learned it's my superpower.
Yeah.
You know?
I have a blog that I wrote. It's called The Superpower Sensitivity.
Oh my God, okay, I'm gonna go read it right after this.
And because I had this very similar experience. And my kids and I always say now, like, better out than in. Yeah. Because
I love that.
Yeah, because this whole like holding it in, and like we know, but for the mind-body connection, mind-body-spirit connection, it makes us sick.
Yeah, like, it does.
Yeah.
We've learned this. Yeah. Like there's literal studies on it.
So, you know, between that, I was talking to a nurse the other day about the power of narrative medicine, which I'd never heard that term before. Yeah, this is coming through places like Harvard and Columbia, like these storytelling things that actually can change
Yeah.
our makeup, our what we're going through to actually heal us.
Yes, I believe it.
Yeah.
I do.
I was like, oh, I got to dig into this one. So it's never enough hours
See,
in the day for all the things I want to
See,
learn.
We're, different things
But-
that will help us stay balanced.
Yeah, exactly. So I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, wait, really quick, because I don't know. What's yours, though? Like, what's an advice
What's-
you'd give your younger
My
self?
younger self.
Now that you've, like, heard all this different information from all these different people.
Yeah. I mean, I think mine is just don't be afraid to shine.
Don't be afraid to be small.
Yeah. Because I looked away from the camera every single time it was in my face. And I tell people all the time, my first time I put the iPhone on me and tried to do a video, I cried. Like, I could not look at myself in a camera for so long. And then I told my therapist coming through COVID, because we were meeting on FaceTime, I go, you know what? The backstory on how you helped me was just to look at my face and say like what I was saying. I was like, that one itself was just this whole other side project that I was like, that really worked.
Oh my gosh.
So
funny you
it's
say that.
crazy.
That's my Ava, Ava.
Yes.
We were talking about how we both just like, it's so uncomfortable for us to do things like, so that's a
And
good
that's
one.
why I love the conversations.
Yeah.
Because
we're like-
it's like, and we can, it's relatable. Yeah, I want to hear from someone else. I don't want to just talk.
Yeah.
I love to listen.
And that's the thing is, it's like we all grow, and it's like it's fun to take things from one another.
But it's also awesome that you ask the questions.
Yeah.
Because it's good to have the give and take and the dialogue. So thank you.
It's good. I know. I was like, okay. I was like, I do talk a lot, talk about myself. I was like, there's moments where, and that's what I love is, again, in yoga, people sharing all the things before, after class, like, and that's how we started. That's when you said, like, no one showed up. See, I told you about the numbers. No one showed up to class, and then you and I chatted, and like, it just like unveiled all
And
these
it was
things.
meant to be that day.
It was.
Because you can make an impact one-on-one.
Yeah.
You can make an impact to a class of 30, or you can make an impact to
Whoever
billions.
listens.
Like, the world is set up this way now.
Yeah.
So, like I always say, there's a messenger for everyone, and we're meant to connect with who we're meant to connect with, and it happens. You just trust the process.
Oh.
So it's pretty great. But
I love it.
I know, and this has been so much fun. I feel like we could go on for hours.
Oh
and
my
hours.
gosh, we could. I mean, we're just gonna be
I
like, okay, let's go after and just do something.
Yeah, I know. Well, we'll have to do a part 2 or something.
Yeah.
But thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, thank
for
you. I
doing
was
this.
so nervous, so I'm so.
I told you it'd be fun.
Yes, it would be fun. I mean, I love talking to you.
Yeah.
It's just more like, ooh, there's things I'm being recorded. I probably said like a million times, but I'm gonna let it go.
Yep.
I'm gonna let it go.
So that goes to that goes to the tagline and our mission here at Be Better. And so I'm just so thankful to do this. And well, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been so amazing. We could go on for hours, but I think you are the perfect example of just a Be Better ambassador, and just the way that you go about teaching yoga and spreading mental health and awareness and just connecting with the world. So thank you. And you just remind me to be real, be you, and be better. Thank you so much for listening to What I Meant to Say. If you enjoyed this conversation, you know what to do. Subscribe, rate, review. And for more great content, courses, and lifestyle, go to BeBetterMedia.tv. Some of these stories contain sensitive content about real-life events, and all of the information in this podcast and from anywhere on the Be Better Media website is for informational purposes only. If you find that you need help, which we all do from time to time, please reach out to a licensed professional for help.